All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
The Greater Will, Elden Beast, and Elden Ring are mysteries yet to be resolved. Their combined dominance over Marika, and by extension the lands between, is heavily experienced, yet is coupled with very little actual information. The Greater Will is a force that holds control and dominance over Marika and the lands between. Although the Greater Will's effects seem to mimic those of outer gods, it's not. The game takes time to carefully describe the influence of those Lovecraftian gods as outer. That title seems to be exclusive to Rot, the Formless Mother, Frenzied Flame, and Twin Deathbird. The lore of the Greater Will is brought to us through a few item descriptions and dialogue. Things such as, long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. It was the vassal beast of the Greater Will and the living incarnation of the concept of order.
Listen, the fingers speak.
The Greater Will has long renounced the demigods. Tarnished, show no mercy. Have their heads. Take all they have left. Indeed.
We also know, thanks to Inya, that the way the Greater Will communicates to the masses is via the two fingers. As they wriggle in space, the finger readers transcribe their movements into language we can understand. What we know based off this information is the following. 1. The Greater Will is not an outer god. However, the influence it has over Marika and the lands between is quite powerful. 2. It sent the Elden Beast, later to become the Elden Ring, to the lands between. 3. The way the Greater Will communicates is through the two fingers, but there is some sort of metaphysical phone line that connects the two. 4. The Shattering War has led to the abandonment of the Greater Will, and thus this metaphorical phone line is broken, leading to the question of how trustworthy and reliable the two fingers and finger readers are. 5. It thrives on the concept of order, any order. As long as we possess at least two great runes, have the will to become the Elden Lord, and enact any order we see fit over the lands between, we seem to get the full backing of the Greater Will. Lastly, we know that the Elden Ring needs a vessel. So the Greater Will sent a vassal who needs a vessel. That vessel becomes the god of the current age. As always, what follows is my personal speculation based off of my understanding of the story being told. As a reminder, my channel uses human psychology as the backbone of this theory. Of course, concepts such as alchemy, religion, astrology, history, and much more are incredibly important. I just believe they serve to bolster and expand the psychological experience. Elden Ring is a story of cosmic proportions, but at the same time, it's a very human story of struggle, sacrifice, and change. I believe the story is being told to us through these two different scales, one on a cosmic scale and the other on an individual scale. For example, because Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, the rules and laws she sets for herself as an individual are reflected in the rules and laws of the world. This theme of micro and macrocosm transcends the entirety of Elden Ring. When Marika decides to remove death from her own ideology, thus making her quote-unquote eternal, the same thing happens to the lands between. Let's start by breaking down the facts and establish a timeline. Hayata tells us that everything there is came from the One Great, then came fractures. We also get a very similar information about the Crucible. This is the manifestation of the Erdtree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial crucible where all life was once blended. I take this to mean that the concept of the One Great and the Crucible are interchangeable, both having the raw materials of life within and blended together, a place of chaos, a place lacking any order. Like all good origin stories, it begins with chaos. Take our universe, for example. and a sea of nothingness was an infinitely dense and hot ball of chaos. Everything we see in the universe came from this singularity. From there, order is born and shapes the very landscapes and laws of the universe. However, thanks to chaos theory, this order will dissolve and chaos will eventually take back over. The never-ending cycle of chaos and order, or causality and regression. Long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast to the lands between. Because we know that this is the concept of order, we can only assume that the Greater Will came out of the One Great. In other words, order came out of the chaos, and that was the birth of fracturing. A golden star is analogous to a falling star or shooting star, also known as a meteor. What must have occurred is in the beginning there was only a land of chaos, perhaps the Shadowlands. And this golden star, the Elden Beast, was the spark of creation and order. One major theory of the origins of life here on Earth is called panspermia, where a meteor crashes into the Earth that has elements of life inside, and thus is the spark of life here on Earth. The Earth is a womb, and the meteor a sperm, one a place of life energy, and the other the spark that ignites it. Recall earlier in this video when I explained that story is brought to us in two different scales, one of cosmic and one on individual. This idea is the cosmic version, the very origin of the universe, lays between, gods, and everything within. To apply this concept to an individual scale, we must turn to psychology. As a fetus, humans are quite literally a blend of possibilities, of life lacking order. From infant to young child, we as humans operate psychologically in what is referred to as the unconscious matrix. You can think of this matrix like the crucible or one great, where nothing is fractured in our inner world. We aren't trying to fit in, we aren't ashamed of ourselves and thus failing parts of ourselves away. We don't judge others or society. We are quite simply living. Sometime in childhood, this all changes and consciousness emerges from this matrix. A golden star is a symbol of the birth of consciousness, the emergence of ego persona. This ego persona determines what we like and dislike not only about ourselves, but as society as well. It fractures us into two realms, one of accepted and one rejected, consciousness and unconsciousness, or persona and shadow. Our consciousness desperately wants things to be orderly and to make sense. It is quite literally the force that makes you watch this and many other lore videos, to make sense out of the chaos that is the lore of Elden Ring. It doesn't like sitting in the unknown ambiguity of the world. Now, the way our consciousness attempts to give things order is by introducing its opposite. Opposites give us a sense of this versus that. It operates as a reference point to the things we want or accept. Here is a simple example of this concept. Stick with me on this as I will soon apply it to the lore in game. Let's say I'm trying to give directions to Caelid, but I can't use northeast, south, or west, but instead I have to use the names of the locations to give you a cardinal direction. To get you where you need to go, I say, go to Caelid, and you'll be there. Assuming you don't have the convenience of a map, you're going to look around, have no idea what I'm talking about, and not go anywhere. Saying, go to Caelid does very little. However, if I introduce Limgrave to the equation, things begin to make much more sense. Now, if I say, that way is Limgrave, it's the opposite direction of Caelid, you immediately start walking in the correct direction. Because I introduced its opposite, I gave order to its situation. There is no up without down, no heat without cold, no good without evil, no light without dark. We see this concept come to life in game via the two fingers giving Empyrean shadows. In an effort to understand the concept of good or accepted qualities, the two fingers give Empyreans a vessel to store the opposite of those qualities. It seals away the bad and rejected qualities to give reference to the good and accepted qualities that will assist them in their societal success. We see these examples everywhere in game. Misbegotten versus nobles, Erdtree versus Shadowtree, Mikola versus Mesmir, and so on. I believe this to be the very reason why the Greater Will, aka the concept of order, communicates via two fingers. Two are as opposites, and opposites equals order. Now, if on top of these opposites I added a third direction without giving its opposite, chaos ensues. To continue with our example of directions, if I added, okay, once you get to Caelid, go towards the mountaintops of the Giants for 3 miles and you'll be there. Remember, without a map, confusion takes over. Now, this is a very simple example using 4 cardinal directions, but what if we used a different location for each degree in a circle? 360 options, each expressing a different direction to walk in. You can quickly see how this can devolve. Another example of this concept of chaos brought to life in threes is the 3-body problem. Not just a Netflix show, but a real-life mystery. The basics of this problem is, in astrophysics, when there are 2 bodies orbiting one another, the math is quite simple and predictable. In other words, it's orderly. However, by adding a 3rd body to that equation, the math breaks down. The reliability of the equation and outcome becomes incredibly unstable. In other words, it falls to chaos quickly. The oversimplified version of this conclusion is that when there's only 2 bodies, A affects B and B affects A. However, when a 3rd body is added, the effect on all 3 bodies change drastically. Now, A affects B and C, but to what degree? Same with B affects A and C, but by how much? Although this problem originates in celestial bodies and their orbits, it can be applied to almost anything. Let's say, for example, you work in an office with only you and someone else, and it's in the vacuum of space, so no other factors come into play. The relationship you have with that other person is directly connected to your actions. However, if a 3rd person is added, now it's not only your actions that affect, but also the actions of that 3rd person. Not only that, but the 3rd person can affect you in some way that makes you act out towards that 2nd person, without them even provoking it. The dynamics become completely unstable and unpredictable. We see this come to life in game several different ways. The 3 fingers, the 3 wolves circling the praying girl, and when Marika births omens. If the very god of order has elements of chaos in her lineage, well, what does that mean for the world at large? No matter how much effort is put in sealing away these elements of chaos, they will appear. It is the very nature of life itself. Without order, nothing can exist. Without chaos, nothing can evolve. The consensus of these 2 and 3 fingers once being a part of a whole hand must be true, as you need both to progress in an individual and by extension society as a greater whole. The one great fractures and the emergence of opposites occur. This source of fracturing seems to be this falling star or Elden Beast. This is played out on both the micro and macro level, our inner world and outer world. What we experience out of this fracturing are 2 very different worlds, a world of order and a world of chaos, or consciousness and unconsciousness, or persona and shadow. The Elden Beast would later become the Elden Ring. In a linear train of thought, this is very hard to explain. However, when viewed through the lens of a single concept being expressed in many different ways, it becomes a little bit more digestible. Like a sapling that grows into the mighty oak, the Elden Beast grows into the mighty Elden Ring, the very thing in game most coveted. What's interesting about this is that the 2 never coexist. Have you ever noticed that when Radagon dies, the Elden Ring fades from his body, and it is then that the emergence of the Elden Beast? This begs the question of the relationship between the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring. Because we know that the Elden Beast is the earlier, or perhaps unrefined version of the Elden Ring, it makes me wonder if we are traveling in time when we fight the Elden Beast. Perhaps we are killing the very cause of the fractures, rather than the effect. Almost like getting to the very root of a problem. Let me know what you think in the comments below about this concept, and what you think is happening in this cutscene. Perhaps a clue will be a place in game where we actually do travel in time, or at least to the emergence of the Elden Ring. Here in Farum Azula, in Marika's boss room, we see the Elden Ring emerging out of what I can only assume is the Crucible or Roots, or the One Great, the very beginning. We know that Farum Azula was struck by a meteor or falling star long ago. I can only assume this to be the same falling star that was sent by the Greater Will. Originally rubble from a ruin which fell from the sky, this surviving fragment was honed into a weapon. The ruin it came from crumbled when struck by a meteorite. As such, this weapon harbors its destructive power. Thanks to Miyazaki himself, we know that before the Golden Order in Erdtree was the time of the Crucible, Dragons, and Beastmen. If Marika is the vessel for the concept of order, then this time before her in the Elden Ring / Elden Beast would be a time of disorder. To me, the linear progression of Farum Azula tells us this story, an evolution from disorder into order. I know that the general consensus of this Elden Ring and Farum Azula is that it's an older version of the Elden Ring, one blended together with the Crucible. It is most certainly old, but I don't believe it's the Crucible version or a different version of the Elden Ring. We know that the Age of the Dragons is prior to the Elden Ring, which means prior to Order and to the Elden Beast. So during the Crucible and Age of Dragons, there was no Order, meaning there was no Elden Beast and no Elden Ring. It is only after the Elden Beast crashes into Farum Azula that Order begins. I believe that Elden Ring and Farum Azula shows this exact moment, the emergence of Order out of the chaos, and not the blending of them or an older version. The first one we come to within the level is filled with beastmen on all fours eating their kin, not exactly a sign of evolution or consciousness. However, as we progress through Farum Azula, so too do the beastmen. They become upright, walk on 2 feet, they make weapons, armor, and shields. They even start having their own religious practice of dragon worship. They go as far as burial traditions only seen in advanced civilizations. A very clear and linear evolution. Something had to have happened for them to go from eating their fallen kin to burying them in gold. I am suggesting this something is the concept of order, or the emergence of consciousness. We know that prior to the Elden Beast, the concept of order was non-existent. So the only way for beastmen to go from chaos to order has to be the introduction of that very concept, by way of the falling star. This could mean that Farum Azula is ground zero for fractures of these two realms, the realm of order and the realm of chaos, or persona and shadow. Because we know order equals the Elden Beast, and the Elden Beast equals the Elden Ring, it's my assumption that this is the beginning of Marika's order, of her consciousness. Because Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, and she is the only person ever mentioned with it, I think it's heavily implied that this little girl is her. All three of these concepts seem to have their origins at Farum Azula. The meteorite is the Elden Beast, the cause of the fracture, the Elden Ring, the concept of order, and the vessel, Marika, beginning by fracturing her very self into opposites, order and chaos, persona and shadow. The world around her is a direct reflection of her inner world. This would also give some clarity as to why Placidusix has 2 heads. He is another visual clue as to what is taking place in Farum Azula at this moment in time. He is a visual clue of the literal separation of 2 and 3. Due to the birth of her consciousness, aka the concept of order, aka the Elden Beast, she fractures. Just like the world around her, her inner world fractures into persona and shadow, into accepted and rejected, grace and blasphemy, conformists and heretics, above and below. I've said it before, but I believe the statue is a memory or snapshot of Marika's first act as a god, to divide herself into persona and shadow. This is the birth of her shadow. This is why Malekith is here, why the sun never sets, always casting a shadow. This is why Destined Death is here. This is why it's separate from the mainland. We know the concept of 3 to be chaos. We know wolves to be shadows. The game leads us right to this conclusion. 3 wolves is a direct opposite to her godly order. In my opinion, this is the only way to make sense of this statue. Why it's here, the story is telling, why Malekith is here sealing away Destined Death, and so much more. It is the visual clue of order emerging out of chaos, or you could say a sapling emerging out of its roots. This concept of outer world reflecting her inner world is a theme that transcends the entire game. Everything that happens in the outer world is a direct reflection of something happening in Marika's inner world. This would mean that the Elden Beast, aka the Elden Ring, is Marika's consciousness. It's her concept of order. It is the way she sees and interacts with the world. It is the set of rules and laws of her inner world, and thus reflected to the outer world. We get some clue of this concept thanks to Goldmask. He seems to have understood this way before we did. Rune discovered by the noble Goldmask. used to restore the fractured Elden Ring when brandished by the Elden Lord. A rune of transcendental ideology which will attempt to perfect the Golden Order. The current imperfection of the Golden Order, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. This fly in the ointment is Marika herself. She is questioning things, attempting something new, something different. This inner change in her own ideology is being reflected to the outside world, which Goldmask does not like. If a god can change their way of thinking, and thus the laws and rules of the outside world, change and instability becomes the only true law. But as stated by Oscar Wilde, change and instability, or chaos, is how one evolves. A phoenix rises out of the ashes of something old and something dying, not out of perfect order. I mean, you have to put her freaking head back on to make the Elden Ring work again. Let's reinforce this connection of the Elden Beast and Marika being one and the same another way. Based off of tons of both in-game evidence and interviews by Miyazaki, we know that the Erdtree and Marika are synonymous. I don't take that to mean that they are the same, but they reflect each other, in a sense that as Marika and her godhood grow, so too does the Erdtree. Miyazaki states that the Shadowlands is where Marika first steps foot, and is also the birth of the Erdtree. However you want to think about it is up to you, but the fact is that as Marika grows and develops, so too does the Erdtree. The Elden Star's incantation states, this legendary incantation is the most ancient of those that derive from the Erdtree. Creates a stream of golden shooting stars that assail the area. It is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. This tells us that this is the very oldest thing to come from the Erdtree. This is a direct connection between the Elden Beast and the Erdtree. Not only the Erdtree, but the very beginning of the Erdtree. So now we have a much fuller timeline where events are starting to stack up on top of each other. That is because they are all meant to represent the same thing, the birth of consciousness. Our timeline now reads the One Great / Crucible. Then we have fracturing of the Crucible into two opposite realms. This fracturing on the outside is shown via the Elden Beast, aka the Falling Star. It takes place at Farum Azula, where beastmen go from chaos to order. This is also shown through the Erdtree, emerging out of the chaotic roots. On the inner world, this is the birth of consciousness, which fractures the inner world into accepted and rejected, or persona and shadow. This is the birth of opposites, order and chaos, two fingers and three fingers, Marika as a god, the Glowmite Queen as an anti-god, the Erdtree and Shadow Tree. These once united worlds separate, and it all happens at the same point on the timeline. We will talk about the physical appearance of the Elden Beast soon, but let's try to figure out exactly what the Greater Will is. Well, I think we can glean a lot about it from its title. Will, or willpower, is defined as effort exerted to control something or restrain impulses. Greater means something more than an individual, more than a singular idea, something collective, something bigger. The way I take the Greater Will is simply human evolution, higher levels of civilization, the emergence of societies and their norms. We know that because of the beastmen having 5 fingers, they were quote-unquote gifted intelligence. From there, a clear and linear evolution takes place, not unlike our own species. This means that through normal evolution and progress, the beastmen became more and more civilized. Although the description says that they were gifted intelligence, I don't take that to mean a literal gift. If you expand that to the human species, well, who gifted us opposable thumbs and bigger brains? Or was it just through time and evolution that these things happened? To me, this is what the Greater Will is. Time, evolution, progression, through the collective will of society. It is why, in the real world, we have rules, laws, schools, governments, etc. It is the ever-persistent forward movement towards more order and higher civility. Remember, will is the repression of our instincts or impulses. Beastmen once fully operated by these impulses and instincts, but civilization continued, and they lost that part of themselves. Now, because this happens collectively, we can deduce that it must happen on an individual scale as well. meaning this will to evolve into something more civilized by repressing impulses occurs within each person within that society. That is exactly what our ego consciousness does. It suppresses certain aspects of our nature to evolve in a very orderly manner. It's what allows us to keep up with social norms and be accepted by society. This is, yet again, exactly what the statue tells us. A repression of our instincts, of our more beastly side. All of that goes into our shadow, into the vault that locks away these aspects of ourselves. For Marika, that vault is Malekith. And wouldn't you know, it's the two fingers that gift these shadowbound beasts to Empyreans. A beast literally made to bound out the darker aspects of their Empyrean counterpart. The Beast Claw states, this incantation represents the fury of Gurranq, his bestial nature returned. I believe this is exactly why the two fingers give Shadowbound Beast. It keeps the concept of opposites, and thus the concept of order, alive within its possible successor. This division of persona and shadow, of civility and instincts, of accepted and rejected, is what drives the greater will. Let's quickly recap what we have talked about so far. In the beginning, everything was blended, a seed with both roots and stem all united. As beastmen gained intelligence and thus consciousness, order quickly followed. This individual and collective will is the greater will, the flow of consciousness and order. This creates individual and collective shadows, something we despise in ourselves and something we despise or go against social norms. These repressed aspects go into the personal and collective shadow, shadowbound beasts individually and the shadowlands collectively. Because the Golden Order and the Erdtree represent the consciousness, anything that goes against that would be relegated to the Shadowlands. Things such as snakes, dragons, aspects of the Crucible, fire, and so on. I really believe that is the hidden meaning in the title of the DLC. It's purely psychological. It's the psychological shadow of the Erdtree, in a very literal sense. Because Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, and the god of this realm, it means it's her inner world that is being reflected to the outer world. The Elden Ring rests within her. It is she that decides the rules and laws of herself, and by extension, the lands between. These beastmen show Marika's personal evolution on a grander scale. It shows her developing as a child from her instinctual unconscious state into her conscious orderly state. These statues tell the whole story. A very young girl holding an orb, which we can equate to intelligence thanks to Gideon's scepter. Scepter in the form of a hand grasping a pearl. The pearl stands for the world, the heavens, and I, representing the many forms of knowledge. Then, a few years later, a complete split from her beastly side. A split into order and chaos, into persona and shadow. Both the story of the beastmen and the story being portrayed in these statues are reflections of one another. A story of gaining knowledge, and thus creating order, from fracturing. Another micro-story of this theme is told to us via Sirach and Godfrey. Sirach, the king of beasts, is tamed and literally sits behind in the shadows of the golden lineage. It's another representation of this repression of our beastly side and cultivating of the orderly. This age of order flourishes for quite some time, but then something happens. This age of plenty suddenly ends. It was once thought that this blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever, but that age of plenty quickly came to a close, and with time, the Erdtree became more an object of faith. Marika shatters the Elden Ring, and the Shattering War commences, leading to the abandonment of the Greater Will. By the time we get to the Lands Between, the Greater Will is long gone, and the fingers spout lies and nonsense. Gideon gained true knowledge after his long exchange with the two fingers, discovering all had been broken long ago. That the trembling fingers, bent with age, and the Erdtree itself were no exception. I'm not going to talk about why I believe the Elden Ring was shattered in the first place, as I did that in a recent video. If you want a detailed explanation, please go check out this video. But because this is a video on the Greater Will, we have to ask ourselves, why was it this war that led to the abandonment of Greater Will? There have been countless others before the shattering, so what was it specifically about this war that did it? One possible explanation is that the link to the Greater Will was severed because of the shattering of the Elden Ring, like the tether between the two was broken. However, this doesn't seem to be the case, because it seems like the only way the Greater Will communicates is via the two fingers, not the Elden Ring or Elden Beast. So, there must be a different explanation. If we take the Elden Ring to be the symbol of Marika's consciousness, then this would mean that something happened that quite literally broke her mind. Something so traumatic that her consciousness could not comprehend it and fractured. This is akin to the term psychological dismemberment, where something is broken, must be taken apart, healed, and put back together. During this time, there is no progression, no forward movement. Think of someone who has gone through a terrible tragedy, perhaps a death of the child. Their inner world is broken, fractured, and chaotic. They are stuck in neutral trying to comprehend what happened and how they let something like this occur. This is what is meant when someone says that they are stuck, that they can't get over something. Perhaps they stop interacting with people, stop going to work, or engaging with society. They become stagnant, quite literally stuck in place, mentally, until they can heal this trauma that fractured them in the first place. I believe this is what is meant by the Greater Will abandoning the lands between. Marika is stagnant. She has stopped all forward movement and progression. The shattering wars between the Shardbearers, the once united great runes housed inside Marika, are scattered, vying for power, yet no victor arose. No order, nor movement. Once again, this inner fracturing of Marika is reflected to the outside world. Mount Gelmir, which houses the volcano manor at its summit, is characterized by sheer cliffs and ominous skies. These qualities only became more pronounced after the shattering. The Elden Beast, as stated earlier in this video, is the element of fracturing. In a physical sense, it's the meteorite that fractures the lands, but in a psychological sense, it's the birth of Marika's consciousness, the birth of fracturing. It's sent by the Greater Will, or by time and normal progression of things. Consciousness is not something that occurs because of effort. It comes with time and development. The Elden Beast is the living incarnation of the concept of order, meaning it creates opposites to give things order. We also discussed that the Elden Beast is the birth of Marika's consciousness. It's also the Elden Ring, meaning that the Elden Beast, Elden Ring, and Marika are all the same, just shown to us in different ways, not unlike the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Elden Beast is the creation of consciousness, the Elden Ring is the developed consciousness. The Elden Beast would later become the Elden Ring. To get a better understanding of the Elden Beast, we need to turn to Marika, and by extension Radagon, as they make up the divine couple. I believe Marika and Radagon represent the Vitruvian Man, or squaring of the circle. The circle, represented by Marika, is the spirit and feminine. The square, represented by Radagon, is the matter, physical, and masculine. This idea is directly reflected in their respective source seals. Marika's is all about the intellectual qualities, while Radagon's is about the physical. It was thought that if one could figure out how to square the circle, or combine spirit and matter, or masculine and feminine, they would reach levels of divinity. It was also thought that the symmetry of the human body would reveal the secrets of the universe. In other words, the human being is the microcosm of the universe, the macrocosm. Now, this deserves its very own video, but this idea of Marika's inner world, the microcosm, being reflected to the outer world, the macrocosm, is exactly what we've been talking about. The fact that the Elden Beast takes the appearance of the universe is actually quite fitting. Because Marika is the spirit, and Radagon is the matter, this is how the Elden Beast attacks it. I believe we have already fought Marika, as she is the spirit side of the Elden Beast. The only physical damage the Elden Beast does to us is via the sword made from Radagon's body, as he is the matter, the physical. It's worth pointing out here that Numen means spirit. Without Radagon, the Elden Beast only does incantations or spiritual attacks. It's important to acknowledge that by defeating the Elden Beast and Radagon, we only seem to be ending the current order. We can assume this because even though we quote-unquote defeat the god that is the Elden Beast, aka Marika, the Elden Ring still lives on with Marika's womb. It seems that we don't defeat anything other than the current world order. Or you could say, Marika's current ideology and way of thinking. By killing the Elden Beast and Radagon, we are letting go and killing the old so the phoenix can arise from its ashes. If we implement Goldmask Mending Rune, that process of evolution is over. The old must die for something new to emerge. If you are familiar with my channel and theory, you would have also heard me talk about Radagon, actually all Elden Lords, being the animus or masculine side of Marika. This still holds very much true and only strengthens this idea. If Marika is the spirit and Radagon is the matter, this would mean Radagon would be the part of Marika that would physically interact with the world. Let's take a quick look back at the Elden Lords. Godfrey defeated the Fire Giants, Radagon led the Liurnian Wars and started the Golden Order fundamentalism, and we are led by Grace, a spirit of sorts, and seem to be doing Marika's bidding. These Elden Lords, including us, all act out Marika's will. We are the matter to her spirit, the action to her thoughts. If you think about it, for a god, Marika is actually hardly ever mentioned and never seen. However, the Elden Lords are right at the heart of every war and issue, all quote-unquote summoned by Marika. The combination of anima and animus, of Marika and the Elden Lords, spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, is what is called to the syzygy, or divine couple. It is them together that make up a complete god, and thus the Elden Beast. Marika is the spirit, the consciousness, and Radagon the physical and matter. The smoking gun that connects Marika to the Elden Beast is this wound on the beast. It's the same exact place as the Death Spear in Marika. Now, the conventional thought is this is the wound on the Elden Beast came by way of the shattering of the Elden Ring. But in the same exact spot as Marika's wound? That would be a mighty big coincidence. My hope is that by now the evidence I have presented allows you to see the Elden Beast slightly differently. Another visual that connects the Elden Beast, Marika's consciousness, and the Erdtree is the overall appearance of the Elden Beast. It has roots of a tree, the macrocosm of the universe, the nervous system of a human, and its bright spot on its head is a clear and overt symbol of consciousness. I can hear you guys screaming at me about the crucifixion move that the Elden Beast does as an attack. Isn't that a clear indication that the Elden Beast is holding Marika hostage? Or at the very least is the one responsible for her current state? My response to that is, well, who is ultimately responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ? On the surface, it's the Romans, but there is a lot more to that story. In fact, it was God himself, who is also Jesus, that sacrificed his son to save humanity. I don't need to go into all the themes of Christianity in this game, but it's not exactly a secret that God did this to himself, the ultimate sacrifice. This is what I believe is happening with Marika. She, the Elden Beast she, did this to herself, just as God did it to himself in a different form. Marika is doing this to herself. She is sacrificing the old to let something new be born. It's clear the old ways aren't working, and something needs to change. That something is her values, her thoughts, her framework, the very way she views and interacts with the world needs to change. It seems she tried with the Halleck tree, but was still repressing her roots, her origins, the beastly chaotic side of her very nature. This is why she is traveling to the Shadowlands, and Miquella is accompanying her. Back to her roots, back to the very beginning where this inner war began. It's not unlike therapy where one must confront their childhood traumas to heal their current world. You have to mentally go back to that place and face it head on. Let's take one more look at our timeline we've created and see if what we talked about has added any clarity. In the beginning was the one great /crucible /womb. That's right, the womb. All the same thing, just on different scales. A mother's womb is the same as all of these other concepts. It's the origin of life, the blending of everything. This is, after all, a very human story about motherhood, childbirth, and loss. Think back about all the themes of motherhood and childbirth. I actually argue that we are quote-unquote born into the game via this statue, presumably of Marika. Her hand is touching her belly, very similar to the portrait we see in the DLC trailer, and she is guiding us to the outside world. She literally gives birth and life back to us tarnished. It's just that the game calls it grace. Speaking of the DLC trailer and this portrait, through deductive reasoning we can assume this to be Marika's mother. We know this is where Marika first stepped foot. We know this is the birth of the Erd Tree, which seems to be a direct reflection of Marika's personal development. We've uncovered that Farum Azula is the emergence of her consciousness, and thus of order, being told to us in the story of both the Beastmen and the statues. We pointed out that consciousness emerges during childhood, and prior to that, the inner world is a place of chaos and disorder, much like the Crucible. The Shadowlands is very much a place of chaos and disorder, and where Marika first stepped foot, and the birth of the Erd Tree. I think what this portrait is telling us is this is where Marika was born, where she developed and where she separated from. Anyways, at some point later, through time and normal progression, aka the greater will, consciousness arises out of the unconscious matrix. Consciousness is quite literally the concept of order. It does everything it can to fracture and separate things to make sense of the world around it. This is the falling star, aka the Elden Beast, golden, may I remind you, that literally fractures the world. It is at this point that the Elden Ring emerges, a symbol of Marika's consciousness, and the very first instance of her splitting herself into persona and shadow, into order and chaos. This is the very first act of her godhood, and is a red herring of what the future holds for the lands between, a place of division, of dogma, and heresy. This unbalanced system, portrayed by Marika's hair, by the way, flourishes for a while. The Age of Plenty spreads across the lands like a warm golden blanket, but something happens. Perhaps that something is what happened to Mesmer. And this Age of Plenty quickly ends, and its unbalanced system finally has to lie in the bed it made for itself, until Marika does something about it. Her consciousness shatters, and the process of letting the old die for something new to flourish begins. Because her inner world is in conflict, the letting go process is halted, almost solely by Radon. He is quite literally holding back the progression, aka the greater will. Until he is removed, stagnation will dominate. Now, this whole time, well, after the shattering of the Elden Ring anyways, I believe Marika is in the Shadowlands, desperately trying to reconcile with her past and forge something better, something new. But the source of resistance must be removed before the Lord that was promised can make their way to the Shadowlands and assist Marika and Mikola in this final pursuit of wholeness. That source of resistance is Radon. Before I wrap this video up, let's quickly recap one last time what these elements in game are. The Greater Will doesn't seem to be an outer god or some kind of malevolent deity. It's simply the ever-persistent force of progression on both an individual and societal level. It's why we create laws, rules, and systems in our real world to help keep society, and those within it, civil and progressive. On an individual level, it's what keeps us constantly improving and curious about the world. It's why we work on things and innovate and evolve. It's just human nature. The Elden Beast is the emergence of consciousness, which is the thing that tries to make sense of the world by enacting order to things. Consciousness is divisive. It separates things into camps of accepted and rejected, into opposites to make sense of its surroundings. The Elden Beast is the force of fracturing. The Elden Beast turns into the Elden Ring, which is the totality of Marika's consciousness. It's everything she personally deems acceptable about her and thus society. The rules are applied to her and are reflected to the outside world because, well, she is the god of this world. I mean, it's her consciousness after all. The two fingers give Empyreans their very own shadows to keep this concept of order, of opposites alive within its possible successor. When stagnation occurs within Marika's inner world, thus reflected on the outer world, the greater will is no longer relevant. Again, I don't think it's a malevolent deity that demands something of its subjects. Simply the forward progression, and once that stops, so too does the greater will. It is only when the force of resistance is removed, aka Radon, that progression can yet again continue. But resistance is a very powerful thing.